In my 3 centuries of galactic diplomacy, I had seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth of new civilizations and the extinction of ancient ones. I had negotiated peace treaties between species so alien that they couldn't even perceive the same dimensions of reality. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for the moment I watched humanity receive their first declaration of war from the Kethvar hegemony. The other ambassadors in the Galactic Council chamber fell silent. Their various appendages, tentacles, and sensory organs turned toward the human delegation with what I can only describe as pity. The Kethvar had conquered 47 star systems in the past decade. They were methodical, ruthless, and had never known defeat. But as I watched the human ambassador's face transform, not with fear, not with despair, but with something else entirely, I realized that perhaps we had all been asking the wrong question. We had spent so long wondering if humanity was ready for the galaxy. We should have been asking if the galaxy was ready for humanity. What I witnessed next would haunt me for the rest of my very long life, and force me to confront a terrifying truth. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that smiles when cornered. Now, prepare yourself for a journey that will show you why the galaxy learned to fear not humanity's anger, but their joy in the face of impossible odds. Ambassador Zephyrian Cathara had seen many things in his 312 years of service to the Galactic Council. His 8 eyes had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the delicate dance of interstellar diplomacy, and the brutal efficiency of galactic warfare. Yet nothing had prepared him for what he observed in the council chambers that day when humanity received their first formal declaration of war. The Kethvar representative, a towering creature of chitin and fury, stood at the center of the great circular chamber. Its voice, amplified through universal translators, echoed off the crystalline walls with the authority of a species that had never known defeat. The declaration was read in the ancient ceremonial manner, each word carefully chosen to demonstrate the hopelessness of resistance. By the ancient rites of conquest and the will of the eternal swarm, the human species is hereby notified of their impending subjugation. You have 7 of your planetary rotations to surrender your homeworld and all colonial territories. Resistance will result in complete extinction. This is the way of the Kethvar. Zephyrian's attention was not on the imposing Kethvar warrior, however. Instead, all 8 of his eyes focused intently on the human delegation. He had studied this young species extensively since their arrival on the galactic stage merely 50 years ago. They were fascinating creatures, these humans, with their short lives and intense emotions, their remarkable adaptability, and their strange tendency to form bonds across species lines. The human ambassador, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chen, sat perfectly still as the declaration was read. Her face showed no emotion, her breathing remained steady, and her hands remained folded calmly in her lap. This was not unusual. Many species maintain composure when faced with overwhelming odds, particularly in formal diplomatic settings. What caught Zephyrian's attention was something far more subtle. It began with Ambassador Chen's lips. The corners began to turn upward, almost imperceptibly at first. Then her shoulders began to shake, just slightly, as if she was suppressing something. Other members of the human delegation began to exhibit similar behavior. By the time the Kethvar finished their formal declaration, Sarah Chen was fighting to contain what appeared to be laughter. This was unprecedented. In all of Zephyrian's centuries of diplomatic service, he had never seen a species react to a death sentence with amusement. Fear, anger, despair, resignation. These were normal responses. Even defiance was understandable, but laughter? This was beyond his comprehension. The Kethvar representative, clearly as confused as Zephyrian, clicked its mandibles in agitation. You find humor in your approaching extinction, human? Ambassador Chen finally lost her composure entirely. She threw back her head and laughed, a sound that echoed through the chamber and caused ripples of unease among the assembled delegates. When she finally controlled herself enough to speak, her words sent a chill through every being present. I'm sorry, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. It's just that you have no idea what you've just done, do you? The chamber fell into complete silence. Even the usual background hum of translation devices seemed muted. The Kethvar representative leaned forward, its 4 eyes narrowing. Explain yourself, human. Sarah Chen stood, and for the first time, Zephyrian noticed something he had missed before. Every single member of the human delegation had the same expression on their faces. It wasn't fear, wasn't anger, wasn't despair. It was anticipation. Pure predatory anticipation. You see, Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, you've just made a critical error. You've given us permission to stop pretending. The confusion in the chamber was palpable. Delegates from dozens of species shifted nervously, their various sensory organs focused entirely on the human woman, who seemed to be enjoying herself far too much for someone who had just been handed a death sentence. Pretending what exactly? The Kethavar's voice carried a note of uncertainty now. Chen's smile widened. Pretending to be civilized. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Zephyrian felt all 8 of his eyes dilating as an instinctive fear response triggered throughout his nervous system. Around the chamber, other delegates were exhibiting similar reactions. Species that had evolved on worlds with dangerous predators were showing signs of acute stress, while even the most aggressive warrior races were unconsciously backing away from the human delegation. You want to know something about humans? Chen continued, addressing the chamber as much as the Kethvar. We didn't climb to the top of our food chain through superior technology, or natural armor, or overwhelming size. We got there through sheer relentless persistence. We are pursuit predators. We chase our prey until it dies of exhaustion, and then we eat it while it's still warm. She took a step forward, and several delegates actually flinched. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is that we learn to enjoy it. Every human child plays games that simulate hunting, warfare, and survival. We call them sports and entertainment, but what they really are is practice. We've spent our entire evolutionary history turning killing into an art form. The Kethvar representative was no longer clicking its mandibles. It stood perfectly still, as if frozen by some primal recognition of danger. Now, Chen said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, you might think that joining the galactic community would have changed us. That exposure to more civilized species would have softened our edges, made us more peaceful, more diplomatic. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate present.
You would be wrong.
We didn't become more peaceful. We just learned to hide what we are. Do you want to know what the human military has been doing for the past 50 years while our diplomats have been sitting in these chambers smiling and nodding and playing nice with all of you? No one answered. No one seemed capable of speech. We've been studying you. All of you. Every species in this galaxy. We know your weaknesses, your fears, your tactical doctrines, your industrial capacities. We know which of your worlds are heavily defended and which are vulnerable. We know the locations of your supply lines, your manufacturing centers, your population centers. The human delegation began to stand, moving with a synchronized precision that spoke of military training. For the first time, Zephyrian noticed that beneath their diplomatic robes, they all wore identical devices on their wrists. We know, Chen continued, because preparing for war is what humans do. It's what we've always done. Even when we were pretending to be peaceful, we were planning for the day when that pretense would no longer be necessary. She activated the device on her wrist, and suddenly the chamber's central display showed a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic arm. Red dots appeared throughout the display, thousands of them, marking positions throughout known space. Those are human ships, Chen said casually. They've been out there the entire time, disguised as merchant vessels, scientific expeditions, and diplomatic couriers. Each one is equipped with enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations from dozens of species. The Kethvar representative stepped backward, its composure finally cracking. This is impossible, it hissed. Our intelligence networks would have detected such a massive military buildup. Chen's laughter returned, but now it carried no warmth whatsoever. Your intelligence networks? You mean the ones run by the species we've been sharing technology with for the past 50 years? The communication networks we've helped you improve? The sensor arrays we've helped you upgrade? The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Dozens of species realized simultaneously that their entire military infrastructure had been compromised from the beginning. But here's the thing, Chen said, her tone becoming almost conversational again. We didn't want to be the bad guys. We genuinely hoped that we could find a place in this galaxy without having to reveal what we really are. We tried diplomacy, we tried cooperation. We tried being the friendly newcomers who just wanted to get along. She gestured toward the Kethvar representative. And then you came along and gave us the one thing we've been desperately trying to avoid, a legitimate excuse to stop holding back. The Kethvar's 4 eyes were wide with something approaching panic. You cannot threaten the entire galaxy. The other species will unite against you. Will they? Chen asked, turning to address the other delegates. Ambassador Vexhai of the Crystalline Collective, Would your people really risk extinction to defend the Kethvar? They've been raiding your mining colonies for the past decade. The crystalline being in question remained silent, its faceted form refracting the chamber's light in agitated patterns. Ambassador Thalon of the Aquatic Federation, are you going to commit your fleets to defend a species that considers your people to be nothing more than mobile water bags? The amphibious delegate's gills fluttered in what Zephyrian recognized as the equivalent of nervous laughter. Chen turned back to the Kethvar. You see, the problem with being galactic bullies is that eventually everyone gets tired of being bullied. The only thing that's kept the other species from uniting against you is fear. But we're not afraid of you. She activated a wrist device again, and the display changed to show a detailed breakdown of Kethvar military assets. Ship locations, fleet compositions, defensive installations, industrial capacity. Everything was laid out in meticulous detail. We know exactly how strong you are, she said, and we know exactly how to destroy you. The question is not whether we can win this war. The question is how much of you we decide to leave alive when we're finished. The chamber was so quiet that Zephyrian could hear the environmental system cycling air through the ventilation shafts. The Kethvar representative stood motionless, its confidence completely evaporated. 7 days, Chen said, echoing the Ketharva's earlier ultimatum. You have 7 days to withdraw from every system you've conquered, release every slave species you've subjugated, and submit to judgment by the Galactic Council for crimes against sentient life. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. And if we refuse? The Kethvar finally asked. Sarah Chen's smile returned, but now it was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Then you'll find out why humanity spent 10,000 years fighting each other before we ever left our home planet. And why, despite all that practice, we never quite managed to wipe ourselves out. She paused, her next words carrying the weight of inevitability. We'll show you what happens when an entire species goes to war not because they have to, but because they want to. The session ended with those words hanging in the air like a death sentence. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber, Zephyrian remained in his seat, all 8 eyes still focused on the human delegation. They were gathering their materials with calm efficiency, discussing logistics in quiet voices, showing no sign of the dramatic transformation that had just taken place. But Zephyrian had seen it, the moment when humanity had finally revealed their true nature, and for the first time in his 3 centuries of life, he understood why some species chose extinction over conquest. Because sometimes the cure was worse than the disease. As Ambassador Chen walked past his seat, she paused and looked directly at him. For just a moment, he saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It was the look of a creature that had spent its entire existence learning how to kill and had finally been given permission to use that knowledge. Don't worry, Ambassador Cathara, she said softly. The Tritarian Republic has been a good friend to humanity. You have nothing to fear from us. Then she was gone, leaving Zephyrian alone with the terrifying realization that humanity's friendship might be even more dangerous than their enmity, because friends knew all your secrets. And humanity, he was beginning to understand, never forgot anything. The Kethvar High Command bunker was carved deep into the heart of their fortress world, Kethmorrow, surrounded by layers of military installations and defensive networks that had never been breached in 7 centuries of warfare. Supreme War Leader Vashtai stood before the tactical display, his 4 eyes studying the enemy positions with the methodical patience that had made him the most feared military commander in the galaxy. The display showed what should have been an impossible sight. Human ships were emerging from hyperspace throughout Kethvar territory, not in the massive formations typical of galactic warfare, but in small groups of 2 or 3 vessels. They appeared seemingly at random, with no discernible pattern to their deployment. Analysis, Vashtai commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a being who had personally overseen the conquest of 47 star systems. Strategic Coordinator Zexul, his second-in-command, manipulated the display controls with his primary appendages while his secondary arms gestured at various tactical elements. The human fleet numbers approximately 15,000 vessels distributed across our territory. Individual ship classes appear to be modified civilian designs, consistent with their claims of disguised merchant ships. Vashtai's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. 15,000 ships. Impressive for a species we classified as minor military threat. However, our combined fleets number over 40,000 vessels, including 12 Dreadnought-class warships. What are their tactical formations? That is the anomaly, War Leader. They appear to have no formations. Each group of human ships is operating independently, with no apparent coordination between units. They are not moving to secure strategic positions or establish supply lines. Most peculiar, they seem to be targeting our least important systems first. This was indeed strange. In 7 centuries of warfare, Vashti had never encountered an enemy that began their campaign by attacking worthless backwater worlds instead of strategic targets. He studied the display more carefully, his tactical mind working through the implications. Show me their attack patterns. The display shifted to show the first engagement between human and Kethvar forces. It had taken place in the Zefkol system, a mining world of minimal strategic value defended by a single patrol squadron. The engagement had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. What Vashti saw challenged everything he understood about space warfare. The human ships had not bothered with the elaborate maneuvering that characterized civilized combat. They had not attempted to disable enemy vessels for capture. They had not even tried to minimize their own casualties. Instead, they had simply accelerated directly at the Kethvar squadron and opened fire with everything they had. The result had been mutual annihilation. Both the human attack group and the Kethvar patrol squadron had been completely destroyed. No survivors, no prisoners, no captured technology. Just debris and radiation. They committed suicide, Zexal observed, his tone reflecting his confusion. What military doctrine calls for the complete expenditure of your forces to destroy an enemy of equal strength? Vashti did not answer immediately. He was studying the tactical data from 17 similar engagements, all with the same result. Human forces engaging in direct frontal assaults that resulted in mutual destruction. It made no sense from a strategic perspective, but something about it triggered an uncomfortable recognition in his warrior's mind. Pull up the biological profile of human psychology, he commanded. The display shifted to show the intelligence files his strategists had compiled on humanity over the past 50 years. Most of it was standard diplomatic information, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, scientific cooperation. But buried in the appendices was a section that few Kethvar commanders had bothered to read. Human recreational activities. Vashti read in growing unease. Humans, it seemed, engaged in recreational activities that simulated warfare, competition, and survival scenarios. They called these activities sports, and they pursued them with an intensity that bordered on religious fervor. More disturbing was the revelation that humans engaged in these activities not for practical training purposes, but purely for entertainment. They enjoyed it. Even more concerning was the section on human historical warfare. The species had spent the vast majority of their recorded history in a state of continuous conflict with themselves. They had developed thousands of different ways to kill each other, and had refined these methods over millennia of practice. Most species that engaged in such extensive interspecies warfare eventually destroyed themselves. Humans had not only survived it, they had thrived on it. War leader Zechel interrupted his reading. We are receiving reports from the outer systems. The human attacks are accelerating. The tactical display updated to show new red icons appearing throughout Kethvar space. The human fleet was moving faster than should have been possible, hitting multiple targets simultaneously across dozens of star systems. But it was the pattern of their attacks that sent a chill through Vashti's exoskeleton. They were not trying to win territory. They were not attempting to capture resources or strategic positions. They were simply destroying everything they encountered, with no regard for their own survival. Each engagement resulted in the complete annihilation of both human and Kethvar forces. How many ships have we lost? Vashti asked. Approximately 8,000 vessels across all sectors. However, the humans have lost an equal number. At this rate of mutual attrition, both fleets will be completely destroyed within 10 standard cycles.
This should have been encouraging news.
If both sides continued to lose ships at equal rates, the Kethvar's numerical superiority would eventually give them victory. But Vashti found no comfort in these calculations. Something about the human strategy felt wrong, like a trap whose mechanism he could not yet perceive. Show me the pattern of human ship losses. The display highlighted the destroyed human vessels in blue. As Vashti studied the distribution, a terrible realization began to form in his mind. The human ships were not being destroyed randomly. They were being sacrificed in a very specific pattern designed to draw Kethvar forces away from their most important positions. Zexal, he said slowly, what is the current position of our primary battle fleet? His second-in-command manipulated the controls, and the display zoomed out to show the disposition of major Kethvar military assets. The primary battle fleet, consisting of 8 dreadnoughts and their escort vessels, was currently dispersed across 12 different systems, responding to human attacks. Recall the fleet immediately, Vashti ordered. All ships are to return to defensive positions around our core worlds. War Leader, if we withdraw our forces, the humans will have free access to the outer systems. The outer systems are irrelevant, Vashti snapped, his tactical instincts finally recognizing the trap being laid. They are using their own ships as bait to scatter our forces. Every engagement we win actually weakens our position because it pulls our ships further from where they need to be. But even as he gave the order, Vashti suspected it was already too late. The human strategy was not designed to win through superior tactics or firepower. It was designed to manipulate the Kethvar into making strategically disastrous decisions through psychological warfare. The humans were not fighting to capture territory or destroy enemy assets. They were fighting to create chaos. As if to confirm his fears, new alerts began appearing on the tactical display. Human ships were appearing in systems that had been declared secure hours earlier. They were striking at communication relays, supply depots, and administrative centers. Not the kind of targets that would win a war, but exactly the kind of targets that would make coordinating a defense impossible. War Leader Sexel reported, his voice strained, "We are losing communication with fleet elements across 7 sectors. The humans appear to be targeting our command and control infrastructure." Vashti felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The humans were not trying to win this war in any conventional sense. They were trying to reduce it to chaos, to break down the careful organization and coordination that allowed the Kethvar military to function effectively. They were trying to turn organized warfare into a brawl. "Update the threat assessment on human military capabilities," he commanded. "Reclassify them as a Class 7 extinction threat." Zeheksul's secondary eyes dilated in shock. "War Leader, Class 7 is reserved for species capable of destroying entire star systems." "Do it." As his subordinate updated the files, Vashti studied the tactical display with new understanding.
Had.
The humans had never intended to fight a conventional war. They had spent 50 years integrating themselves into galactic civilization not to learn how to be peaceful, but to learn how their enemies thought, how they organized themselves, how they could be destroyed. The display updated again, showing new human attacks in systems that should have been impossible for them to reach. They were moving too fast, hitting too many targets simultaneously, coordinating their attacks with a precision that suggested far more sophisticated command and control capabilities than their apparent chaos would indicate. "War Leader," came another report from the communications station. "We are receiving surrender requests from garrison commanders in 14 systems. They report being surrounded by human forces and are requesting permission to negotiate." Denied, Vashti responded immediately. "No negotiations. No prisoners. If the humans want total war, they will have it." But even as he spoke, he wondered if the Kethvar were prepared for what total war with humanity might actually mean. His species had conquered dozens of others through superior organization, tactics, and technology. They had never faced an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, simply to ensure that their opponents suffered equal losses. The humans were not trying to win. They were trying to ensure that everyone lost. And that, Vashti realized with growing dread, was a completely different kind of warfare than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Kethvar had built their empire on the assumption that other species valued their own survival above all else. But what did you do when faced with an enemy that seemed to value destruction above survival? As he watched the tactical display update with new reports of human attacks, Vashti began to understand why the other species in the Galactic Council had reacted with such fear when the humans revealed their true nature. It was not their technology that made them dangerous. It was their complete willingness to use it. The war was only 3 days old, and already Vashti could see that everything the Kethvar thought they knew about warfare was about to be proven wrong. The humans were not fighting to conquer or to defend. They were fighting for the sheer joy of fighting. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the Kethvar had ever faced. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching the tactical display with the calm satisfaction of a predator that had finally been unleashed. Around him, his crew worked with the smooth efficiency of a machine designed for one purpose: the complete and total destruction of anything that stood in their way. The Indomitable was not actually a warship. Despite its current function, like all of the vessels in the human fleet, it had begun life as something else entirely. In this case, it had been a deep space mining platform designed to process asteroids in the outer reaches of human space. Now, its mining lasers had been recalibrated as weapons. Its ore processing bays had been converted into missile launchers, and its cargo holds were packed with enough antimatter to sterilize a continent. It was, Admiral Rodriguez reflected, a perfect metaphor for humanity's approach to galactic warfare. They had taken the tools of peace and turned them into instruments of war with a creativity that was both beautiful and terrifying.
Admiral, reported Commander Sarah Kim from the sensor station. We have confirmation of successful strikes on targets in the Vexai, Mordan, and Kethvar systems.
Casualty reports are coming in now. Rodriguez nodded, studying the updated tactical display. Red icons marked the locations of destroyed human ships, while blue icons showed confirmed enemy kills. The numbers were exactly as planned, roughly equal losses on both sides, with a slight advantage to the Kethvar in terms of raw ship counts, which was precisely what the humans wanted. Any word from the Kethvar High Command? Rodriguez asked. Intelligence intercepts suggest they are beginning to understand the true nature of our strategy, reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the communication station. Supreme War Leader Vashtai has ordered the recall of their dispersed fleets to defensive positions around their core worlds. Excellent. How long until they complete the recall? Approximately 18 hours, Admiral. Rodriguez smiled. 18 hours. More than enough time to spring the real trap. The beauty of the human strategy was not in its complexity, but in its simplicity. For 50 years, humanity had observed the way galactic warfare was conducted. They had studied the elaborate tactical doctrines, the careful preservation of resources, the political considerations that limited how aggressively any species could fight without risking condemnation from the Galactic Council. And then they had decided to ignore all of it. The Kethvar, like every other species in the galaxy, fought wars to achieve specific objectives: territorial expansion, resource acquisition, political dominance. They calculated acceptable losses, maintained supply lines, preserved valuable assets for future use. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that warfare was a means to an end. Humans fought wars for different reasons entirely. Admiral, called out Commander Kim, we're receiving priority signals from Fleet Groups Alpha through Zeta. All units report ready for Phase 2 operations. Rodriguez activated his command console, bringing up a three-dimensional map of the local galactic arm. Thousands of green icons showed the current positions of human vessels, spread throughout Kethvar space in what appeared to be a random distribution. But appearances were deceiving. Every ship was exactly where it needed to be for what came next. All commands, this is Admiral Rodriguez. He broadcast on the secured fleet frequency. Initiate Phase 2. Repeat, initiate Phase 2. Authorization code, Broken Arrow 779er. Execute immediately. Across dozens of star systems, human ships began to move with sudden, coordinated precision. The apparent chaos of the previous 3 days was revealed to have been carefully orchestrated misdirection. Every engagement, every sacrifice, every seemingly suicidal attack had been designed to position Kethvar forces exactly where the humans needed them to be. Now the real war would begin. The first sign that something had changed came from the Kethvar border worlds. Human ships that had been conducting seemingly random hit-and-run attacks suddenly began concentrating their efforts on specific targets, but not the targets any rational military commander would expect. They were attacking civilian infrastructure, not to kill civilians. The humans were careful to broadcast warnings and allow evacuation time. They were destroying the economic and logistical networks that held the Kethvar Empire together. Power generation facilities, transportation hubs, communication networks, manufacturing centers, the foundations of civilization itself. Within 6 hours, 17 Kethvar systems had been rendered effectively uninhabitable, not through military conquest but through the systematic destruction of everything that made modern life possible. Admiral, reported Commander Kim, her voice carrying a note of awe, we're receiving casualty reports from the Kethvar systems. Military losses are minimal, but economic damage is being assessed in the trillions of credits. Entire planetary populations are evacuating. Rodriguez nodded grimly. This was the difference between human warfare and galactic warfare. Other species fought to capture and control. Humans fought to destroy and deny. If they could not have something, they would make sure no one else could have it either. The genius of the strategy was that it was completely legal under galactic law. The Kethvar had declared total war, which meant that all of their infrastructure was considered a legitimate military target. The humans were simply taking them at their word. What's the response from the other galactic powers? Rodriguez asked. Mixed, replied Lieutenant Commander Hayes. The species that have been victimized by Kethvar aggression are expressing cautious approval. The more neutral parties are calling for immediate peace negotiations. The Galactic Council has scheduled an emergency session, and the Kethvar? Supreme War Leader Vashtai has issued a statement declaring that any attack on civilian infrastructure will be met with retaliation in kind. Rodriguez's smile widened. Perfect. Signal to all commands. The Kethvar have just authorized us to target their civilian infrastructure. Begin Phase 3. If Phase 2 had been shocking, Phase 3 was revelatory. Human ships throughout Kethvar space began targeting not just industrial facilities, but the basic infrastructure of planetary civilization. Water treatment plants, food distribution networks, medical facilities, schools, everything that made life possible for billions of Kethvar citizens. But still, they were careful to minimize actual casualties. Evacuation warnings were broadcast hours in advance. Safe zones were established for refugee populations. Medical aid was even provided in some cases. The message was clear. Humans were not interested in genocide. They were interested in making the Kethvar Empire completely uninhabitable. Admiral, reported Commander Kim, we're receiving communications from Kethvar civilian authorities. They're requesting humanitarian assistance for refugee populations. Grant the requests, Rodriguez replied immediately. Establish safe zones in neutral space. Provide food, medical supplies, shelter, whatever they need. His senior staff exchanged glances. Lieutenant Commander Hayes finally voiced what they were all thinking. Sir, aren't we at war with these people? Rodriguez turned to face his officers, and for a moment they saw something in his eyes that made them understand why the galaxy had learned to fear humanity.
No, he said quietly.
We're not at war with the Kethvar people. We're at war with the Kethvar Empire. There's a difference. The distinction was important, and it was one that no other species in the galaxy had ever made. The Kethvar Empire was a military and political structure that oppressed dozens of species and claimed ownership over hundreds of worlds. The Kethvar people were simply the beings who happened to have been born into that system. Humans had learned, through their own violent history, that empires could be destroyed without destroying the people who lived within them. It required a very specific kind of warfare, one that targeted systems rather than beings, infrastructure rather than populations. It was a lesson that had cost humanity dearly to learn, but once learned, it made them incredibly effective at dismantling civilizations. Admiral, came another report from the sensor station. Kethvar military forces are beginning to withdraw from their conquered territories. It appears they are prioritizing the defense of their core worlds over maintaining their empire. Casualty reports? Kethvar military losses are approximately 12,000 ships. Human losses are approximately 11,000 ships. However, Kethvar economic and infrastructure losses are being calculated in the quadrillions. Rodriguez studied the tactical display, watching as red icons representing destroyed human ships flickered and died throughout the combat zone. Each icon represented hundreds of human lives, men and women who had volunteered for this mission knowing they would likely not survive it. But they had not died in vain. Their sacrifice had bought humanity something precious. The knowledge that they could fight a war on their own terms, using their own methods, without having to conform to the galaxy's expectations of civilized warfare. Open a channel to the Kethvar High Command, Rodriguez ordered. Channel open, Admiral. Rodriguez took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the message that would end this phase of the war. Supreme War Leader Vashti, this is Admiral Rodriguez of the Human Fleet. I am prepared to discuss terms for the cessation of hostilities. The response came immediately, Vashti's voice carrying across the light years with barely controlled fury. You have destroyed 17 worlds, human billions of my people are homeless refugees. You speak of terms? I speak of reality. Rodriguez replied calmly. In the past 4 days, you have lost approximately 1/3 of your military fleet and most of your empire's economic infrastructure. Your people are safe, we have made sure of that, but your ability to maintain control over your conquered territories has been effectively eliminated. There was a long pause before Vashti responded. What do you want? The complete withdrawal of Kethvar forces from all conquered systems, the release of all slave species under Kethvar control, reparations to be paid to all species that have suffered under Kethvar aggression, and a formal acknowledgement that the Kethvar Empire will never again engage in aggressive warfare. And if we refuse? Rodriguez's voice carried no emotion whatsoever when he replied, then we will continue to dismantle your civilization one piece at a time until there is nothing left but scattered refugees and empty worlds. The choice is yours, war leader. Peace with honor or total destruction. The channel went silent. Around the bridge of the Indomitable, Rodriguez's crew waited for the response that would determine whether this war would end or escalate into something that would reshape the galaxy forever. When Vashti's reply finally came, it carried the weight of a species surrender. We will consider your terms. Rodriguez closed the channel, and turned back to his tactical display. Phase 3 was complete. The Kethvar Empire had been effectively neutered as a military threat. Their conquered territories were already declaring independence, and their civilian population was safe in human-protected refugee zones. Most importantly, the galaxy had learned a lesson about humanity that would not soon be forgotten. They were not conquerors, they were exterminators. When they went to war, they did not seek to rule their enemies. They sought to ensure that their enemies would never again be capable of making war on anyone. The Galactic Council chambers had never hosted a session quite like this one. For the first time in the institution's 800-year history, the assembled delegates sat in complete silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they processed what they had witnessed over the past 7 days. Ambassador Zephyrian Kethara observed the gathering with all 8 of his eyes, noting details that his diplomatic training had taught him to watch for. The usual undercurrents of political maneuvering were absent. No species was forming alliances or negotiating deals in the margins of the session. Everyone was simply trying to understand what humanity's victory over the Kethvar meant for the future of galactic civilization. At the center of the chamber, a holographic display showed the current state of what had once been the Kethvar Empire. Red zones marked areas where infrastructure had been completely destroyed. Yellow zones indicated regions where Kethvar forces had withdrawn. Green zones showed former slave species that had declared independence and were requesting recognition from the Galactic Council. The numbers were staggering. In 7 days, humanity had dismantled an empire that had taken the Kethvar 3 centuries to build. They had done it with minimal loss of life but maximum psychological impact. The message was clear to every species in the galaxy. This is what happens when you threaten humanity. The Council recognizes Ambassador Chen of the Human Federation, announced the session moderator, an ancient crystalline being whose species had helped found the galactic government. Sarah Chen rose from her seat with the same calm demeanor she had shown when receiving the Kethvar declaration of war. But now, Zephyrian noticed, the other delegates watched her with a very different kind of attention. The pity and condescension were gone, replaced by something much more primal, fear. "Honored delegates," Chen began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. "I want to address the concerns that many of you have expressed about humanity's conduct during the recent conflict." She activated a control device, and the holographic display shifted to show a detailed breakdown of the war's casualties. Total military losses: 23,000 human vessels, 27,000 Kethvar vessels. Civilian casualties: fewer than 50,000 across all affected systems, primarily due to accidents during evacuation procedures. Infrastructure destroyed: approximately 40% of the Kethvar Empire's industrial capacity. The numbers hung in the air like an indictment. The Kethvar Empire had been effectively destroyed as a political entity, but its people had survived. Many of you have described our tactics as brutal, ruthless, and unprecedented. You are correct. But I want you to understand why we chose to fight this way, and what it means for the future of galactic relations. Chen paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. For 50 years, humanity has been the newcomer to galactic civilization. We have been the students, learning your ways, adopting your customs, trying to fit into a society that was already ancient when our species first looked up at the stars. We have been grateful for your patience and your guidance. She activated her control device again, and the display showed scenes from various human colonies and trading posts throughout the galaxy. Happy, peaceful images of humans working alongside dozens of other species. But we never forgot what we were before we met you. We never forgot the lessons our own history taught us about the nature of power, the reality of conflict, and the price of peace. The display shifted again, showing historical footage from Earth's past. Wars, revolutions, conflicts spanning millennia of human civilization. Every species in this chamber has experienced warfare. But most of you experienced it as a phase of your development, something you grew out of as you matured as a civilization. Humanity is different. We never grew out of it. We never stopped preparing for it. We simply learned to hide our preparations behind smiles and trade agreements. Ambassador Vexai of the Crystalline Collective activated his translation device, his voice carrying a note of accusation. Are you saying that humanity has been planning for war since joining the galactic community? Chen turned to face the crystalline being directly. I am saying that humanity has been planning for every possible scenario since joining the galactic community. War was just one of them. We also had plans for economic integration, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and dozens of other possibilities. She activated the display again, showing the extensive network of human diplomatic, scientific, and commercial activities throughout the galaxy. The difference is that we were prepared for all of them. When the Kethvar declared war on us, we didn't have to scramble to build a military response. We already had one, waiting for the day it might be needed. The implications of this revelation settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Every species present began to realize that humanity had been studying them, learning about them, and preparing for potential conflicts with them for decades. But here's what I want you to understand, Chen continued, her tone becoming more serious. We didn't want to use those plans. We hoped we would never have to. We genuinely wanted to find our place in this galaxy through peaceful means. She gestured toward the section of the chamber where the Kethvar delegation would normally sit. It was empty now, Supreme War Leader Vashtai having been recalled to deal with the crisis on his homeworld. The Kethvar forced our hand. They gave us no choice but to reveal what we really are. But in doing so, they also gave us an opportunity to demonstrate something important. The display shifted one final time, showing the current status of the former Kethvar territories. Dozens of species were declaring independence, setting up their own governments, and requesting protection from the Galactic Council. Humanity does not seek to conquer other species. We do not want to build an empire. What we want is simple, to be left alone to live our lives in peace. But if anyone threatens that peace, we will respond with everything we have. Chen's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but every being in the chamber could hear her clearly. And we have a lot more than anyone realized. She deactivated the display and returned to her seat. The chamber remained silent for several long moments as the delegates processed what they had heard. Finally, Ambassador Thalon of the Aquatic Federation activated his translation device. Ambassador Chen, many of us are concerned about the precedent this conflict has set. If every dispute is to be resolved through total warfare, it won't be. Chen interrupted firmly. This was not about resolving a dispute. This was about stopping a genocidal empire that had already enslaved dozens of species and was planning to enslave more. She stood again, addressing the chamber as a whole. Humanity made a decision 50 years ago to integrate peacefully into galactic society. We have honored that decision and will continue to honor it. We have no territorial ambitions, no desire for conquest, no interest in ruling over other species. Her expression hardened. But we also made another decision 50 years ago. We decided that we would never again allow ourselves to be threatened with extinction by anyone for any reason. The Kethvar chose to test that resolve. The results speak for themselves. Ambassador Zephyrian finally activated his own translation device. All 8 of his eyes focused intently on the human delegate. Ambassador Chen, what assurances can you give us that humanity will not use its military capabilities against other members of the galactic community? Chen's response was immediate and direct, the same assurances we have been giving you for 50 years through our actions. We have had the capability to destroy any of your civilizations since the day we arrived in this galaxy. The fact that we haven't done so should tell you everything you need to know about our intentions. The truth of this statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. If humanity had been preparing for war since their arrival, if they had been studying every species and developing contingency plans for conflict, then they could have attacked anyone at any time. The fact that they had chosen diplomacy over warfare was not evidence of weakness, but of restraint. But, Chen continued, let me be absolutely clear about one thing. Humanity's commitment to peace is not the same thing as pacifism. We will defend ourselves, our allies, and innocent species against aggression from any source. The Kethvar learned this lesson. I hope others will not need to learn it the hard way. She sat down again, leaving the chamber in contemplative silence. Zephyrian found himself reviewing everything he thought he knew about humanity, their cheerful cooperation, their eagerness to learn, their apparent naivety about galactic politics. All of it had been a carefully maintained facade, designed to hide the most sophisticated military apparatus the galaxy had ever seen. The truly terrifying thing was how effective that facade had been. Even now, after witnessing the complete destruction of the Kethvar Empire, Chen sat in her chair with the same pleasant expression she had worn during routine trade negotiations. If he had not seen the transformation with his own eyes, he would never have believed that this seemingly harmless diplomat represented a species capable of such devastating warfare. As the session continued with routine business, Zephyrian found himself thinking about the broader implications of what had been revealed. Humanity had demonstrated that they could dismantle a galactic empire in a matter of days. They had done it with minimal loss of life, but maximum psychological impact. More importantly, They had done it while maintaining the moral high ground. They had provided humanitarian aid to their enemies' civilians. They had given fair warning before every attack. They had followed all the laws of war, even while conducting warfare in a way that no other species had ever imagined possible. The Kethvar had declared total war, expecting to face an enemy that would fight by the established rules of galactic conflict. Instead, they had faced an enemy that followed the rules, while completely redefining what was possible within those rules. As the session concluded and delegates began to file out of the chamber, Zephyrian remained in his seat, still processing the magnitude of what had changed in the galaxy's power structure. The balance of power had not simply shifted, it had been completely overturned. Humanity was not the newest member of galactic civilization. They were its most dangerous guardian. And that, Zephyrian realized, might not be such a bad thing. For the first time in centuries, aggressive species throughout the galaxy would have to think twice before attacking their neighbors. The threat of human intervention would serve as a deterrent that could prevent countless conflicts. But it also meant that humanity now held a position of unprecedented power in galactic affairs. They could choose which conflicts to intervene in, which species to protect, which empires to allow to exist. The galaxy had gained a protector. Whether it had also gained a master remained to be seen. 6 months after the Kethvar incident, as historians were already calling it, Ambassador Zephyrian Cathara found himself in the most unlikely of places, sharing a meal with the human who had forever changed the galaxy's understanding of warfare. The restaurant was located on Harmony Station, a massive space platform that served as a neutral meeting ground for diplomatic functions. The establishment specialized in cuisine that could be safely consumed by multiple species, though Zephyrian suspected that Ambassador Sarah Chen had chosen this particular table more for its privacy than for its menu. "Thank you for accepting my invitation," Chen said, her tone as warm and pleasant as it had been during their earliest diplomatic encounters. It was remarkable how quickly she had returned to her pre-war demeanor, as if the transformation Zephyrian had witnessed in the council chambers had never happened at all. "I confess to curiosity," Zephyrian replied, using 3 of his hands to manipulate his eating utensils, while his other 5 hands remained folded in his lap. "In all my years of diplomatic service, I have never been invited to dinner by someone who recently demonstrated the capability to destroy my entire civilization." Chen laughed, and the sound was genuinely cheerful. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk with you. I've been reading the intelligence reports about how various species have been reacting to recent events. Your people, in particular, have been asking some very thoughtful questions." She paused to take a sip from her beverage, a blue liquid that Zephyrian's diplomatic briefings identified as a mild stimulant popular among humans. "The Tritarian Republic has been our longest ally in the galactic community. Your species was the first to welcome us, the first to offer genuine friendship, the first to treat us as equals rather than curiosities. I wanted to make sure that recent events haven't changed that relationship." Zephyrian's primary eyes focused on Chen, while his peripheral eyes continued to monitor the restaurant's other patrons. Old diplomatic habits died hard, and after witnessing humanity's capacity for strategic deception, he found himself far more cautious about security than he had been 6 months ago. "I will be frank with you, Ambassador," he said. "My government is concerned. The revelation that humanity has been preparing for war since joining the galactic community has caused considerable anxiety among our leadership." "I understand their concern," Chen replied. "But I want you to consider something. In the 50 years since humanity joined the galactic community, we have never used our military capabilities against a peaceful species. The Kethvar were the first to force our hand, and only because they threatened us with extinction." She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "Your people have been our friends for 50 years. We have shared technology, cultural exchanges, trade partnerships. We have fought alongside Tritarian forces against space pirates and natural disasters. Do you really think that all of that was an elaborate deception designed to position us for eventual conquest?" Zephyrian considered the question carefully. His species had indeed benefited enormously from their relationship with humanity. Human technology had revolutionized Tritarian medicine, agriculture, and engineering. Human cultural influences had enriched Tritarian art and philosophy. Human military assistance had helped the Tritarian Republic defend against several minor threats over the decades. "No," he finally admitted, "but the scale of your preparations suggests a level of strategic thinking that is unsettling to those of us who prefer transparency in international relations." Chen smiled ruefully. "I understand. But consider this. If humanity had announced 50 years ago that we were building the most powerful military force in galactic history, How do you think the other species would have reacted? Zephyrion's feathers ruffled slightly as he contemplated the scenario. The answer was obvious and disturbing. There would have been a preventive war, he said slowly. The established powers would have united to destroy humanity before we could become a threat. Exactly. So we faced a choice: build our defenses in secret while pursuing peaceful integration, or be open about our preparations and face immediate destruction. Chen took another sip of her beverage, giving Zephyrian time to process the implications. We chose secrecy not because we were planning aggression, but because we were planning survival. Everything we did was designed to give us the capability to defend ourselves if necessary, while hoping that necessity would never arise. But the Kethvar made it necessary. The Kethvar made concealment impossible, Chen corrected. Once they declared war on us, we had no choice but to reveal our true capabilities. The alternative would have been to let them destroy us while maintaining the pretense of weakness. Zephyrian sampled his own meal, a complex mixture of proteins and minerals that had been carefully prepared to meet Tretarian nutritional requirements. As he ate, he found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about human psychology and motivation. There is something else that troubles my government, he said after several moments. The efficiency with which you dismantled the Kethvar Empire suggests that you have detailed contingency plans for warfare against every species in the galaxy, including allies. Chen's expression didn't change, but Zephyrian caught a subtle shift in her posture that his diplomatic training recognized as increased attention. That's a reasonable assumption, she said carefully. And you're not wrong. We do have contingency plans for conflicts with every major galactic power. She paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. But here's what I want you to understand about those plans. They're not invasion scenarios or conquest strategies. They're defensive protocols designed to neutralize threats while minimizing casualties and preserving civilian populations. The distinction being that our plans are designed to end conflicts quickly and decisively, not to rule over conquered territories. When we wargamed potential conflicts with the Tretarian Republic, for example, our objective was never to occupy Tretarian worlds or subjugate your people. Chen activated a small holographic projector built into the table, displaying a simplified star map showing human and Tretarian territories. Our hypothetical strategy would have been to disable your military capabilities and cripple your governmental infrastructure, then immediately offer humanitarian aid and assistance in rebuilding under a more peaceful leadership structure. The goal would be to eliminate the threat while preserving the civilization. Zephyrian studied the display with growing unease. Even in describing a theoretical conflict with his own people, Chen spoke with the calm precision of someone who had thought through every detail. You speak of this very casually for someone discussing the theoretical destruction of my government. Because it is theoretical, Chen replied firmly. And because I want you to understand that humanity's approach to warfare is fundamentally different from what the galaxy has seen before. We don't fight for conquest, expansion, or dominance. We fight to remove threats and restore peace. She deactivated the display and leaned back in her chair. The Kethvar Empire was a threat not just to humanity, but to every peaceful species in the galaxy. They had enslaved dozens of civilizations and were actively planning to enslave more. By destroying their capacity for warfare, we didn't just defend ourselves. We liberated their victims and eliminated a source of suffering for countless beings. A noble goal, Zephyrian acknowledged, but it still leaves humanity in a position of unprecedented power. You have demonstrated that you can destroy any government in the galaxy that you find objectionable. True, but consider what we've done with that power in the 6 months since the Kethvar conflict ended. Chen activated her holographic projector again, this time showing a map of the former Kethvar territories. 17 species that were enslaved by the Kethvar have declared independence. We have provided them with humanitarian aid, technical assistance, and military protection during their transition to self-governance. We have not claimed a single world for ourselves, not established a single colony in their territories, not demanded any tribute or compensation for our efforts. The map updated to show the current political situation in the region. Dozens of small, independent governments were flourishing under human protection. If we were conquerors, this would have been the perfect opportunity to expand our territory. Instead, we used it to expand freedom. Zephyrian found himself nodding as he studied the display. It was true that humanity had shown remarkable restraint in the aftermath of their victory. They could have claimed the entire Kethvar Empire as spoils of war, but instead they had helped their former enemies rebuild as independent, peaceful civilizations. I begin to understand, he said slowly. But this raises another question. What happens when humanity decides that another government is a threat? Who decides whether a species deserves to be liberated from their own government? Chen's expression became more serious. That's the question that keeps me awake at night, she admitted. Because you're right. We now have the power to reshape galactic civilization according to our judgment. And that's a responsibility I'm not sure any single species should have. She deactivated the display and met Zephyrian's gaze directly. Which is why I'm talking to you, and why we're having similar conversations with representatives from every major galactic power. Humanity doesn't want to be the galaxy's policeman. We want to work with our allies to establish systems and institutions that can maintain peace without requiring constant military intervention, such as enhanced cooperation between galactic peacekeeping forces, better early warning systems for detecting aggressive behavior before it escalates to warfare, more effective economic sanctions for species that threaten their neighbors, diplomatic mechanisms that can resolve conflicts before they require military solutions. Chen paused, choosing her next words carefully. Humanity is willing to serve as the ultimate guarantor of galactic peace, but only as a last resort. We want to build a galaxy where that guarantee never has to be invoked. Zephyrian considered this proposal as he finished his meal. It was ambitious, perhaps impossibly so. But it was also the first realistic plan he had heard for managing the new reality of human military supremacy. And if these diplomatic mechanisms fail? If another aggressive species emerges, then we will do what we did to the HFY, Chen replied without hesitation. We will remove the threat quickly, decisively, and with minimal civilian casualties. But we will also continue to work toward a future where such interventions become unnecessary. As their meal concluded and they prepared to part ways, Zephyrian found himself with one final question. Ambassador Chen, may I ask you something personal? Of course. When you revealed humanity's true military capabilities in the council chambers, you seemed to genuinely enjoy the shock and fear you caused. Was that satisfaction real, or was it calculated for psychological effect? Chen considered the question for several long moments before answering. Both, she said finally. I took no pleasure in frightening our friends and allies. But I will admit to a certain satisfaction in seeing the expression on Supreme War Leader Vashti's face when he realized what he had gotten himself into. She smiled, and for just a moment, Zephyrian caught a glimpse of the predator that lurked beneath her diplomatic facade. Humanity spent 50 years being underestimated by aggressive species who saw us as weak because we chose peace over conflict. There was something deeply satisfying about proving them wrong. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Zephyrian found himself with a new understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. They were not conquerors or tyrants, but they were also not the naive newcomers he had first believed them to be. They were something far more complex and potentially more dangerous. A species that had chosen peace while maintaining the capability for total war, and who were willing to use that capability to protect not just themselves but any innocent species that faced extinction at the hands of aggressive empires. The galaxy had gained not just a protector, but a guardian. Whether that was a blessing or a curse would depend on humanity's wisdom in wielding the power they had revealed. But as Zephyrian made his way back to the Tritarian diplomatic quarters, he found himself oddly comforted by the thought that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human ships continued their silent vigil, ready to respond to any threat that might emerge. For the first time in his long diplomatic career, he believed that lasting peace might actually be possible, as long as humanity remained committed to preserving it.